Hello, I'm Ian Stevenson from Siacombe, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the second episode of our new Guardians for Good podcast. At Siacombe, we have the privilege of meeting a lot of people who work at the forefront of digital forensics and online safety, and we hear their insights and stories, and we benefit from their experience. We wanted to find a way of sharing that insight and experience with as many people as possible in the community, and that's where this podcast comes in. My guest today is Peter Edge. Now Chief Executive of Controlled Strategies, Peter previously spent many years working in law enforcement, starting out at Essex County Prosecutor's Office and eventually retiring as an acting Deputy Director at the Department for Homeland Security. Welcome, Peter Edge.
Ian, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today and talk about child exploitation and computer forensics. It's very, very near and dear to me.
I really appreciate that, Peter. I've tried to introduce you. You can probably do a far better job of introducing yourself. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your career?
Well, I had a very expansive law enforcement career of 32, almost 33 years. And I started at the state and local level, as you indicated, at the Essex County Prosecutor's Office as a detective there. And I ultimately had a leadership position in that office in my early days of law enforcement and moved on to the United States Customs Service. And in 1998, I moved on to the Customs Service as a special agent with the Department of Treasury. And that was pre 9/11. Then the Department of Homeland Security was created, and we became U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. During those years, it was a merger that was of the investigators from the U.S. Customs Service, the special agents, and the special agents from the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service. And that made up the Office of Investigations for ICE. There were always two directorates within ICE, Enforcement and Removal Operations, and what eventually became Homeland Security and Investigations. I was privileged to be selected to be a deputy director of Homeland Security Investigations and ultimately the director of Homeland Security Investigations. And prior to my retirement, about 7 years ago, I became the acting deputy director of all of ICE during some very, very challenging times in the U.S. government, but very, very important work that we were able to accomplish. In my early days of law enforcement, I worked primarily legal proceedings as an investigator, preparing attorneys for trial in all different types of cases, from homicides, sexual assaults, child abuse, and rape analysis cases, and narcotics cases. I ultimately went into the field as a narcotics detective and spent several years working in the war on drugs back in the late 80s and early 90s. That was a great foundation that I received. A lot of the work that I did was on the streets of northern New Jersey, and was really fascinating for a young man straight out of college. So it was a great, great time for me, and quite a bit of fun. One of the things that kind of correlates with the topic of discussion here would be something I learned early in my career. You know what you're capable of, and you know what you're not capable of. And I had worked narcotics investigations for a significant period of time. Then I was transferred to the child abuse unit within the Essex County Prosecutor's Office to help them with search warrants, because the violators in those areas started being a little bit more violent, and they really wanted some folks who were used to dealing with that to be in those squads, as we called them back then. Interestingly enough, I realized that that wasn't something that I could handle from a mental health perspective. And I requested to go back to narcotics. It's one thing to investigate those who have contraband, and it's another thing to investigate those who are doing harm to defenseless children, young babies, and things of that nature. So that was a very difficult time, but really quite transformative for me. And that stuck with me through the rest of my law enforcement career. You know what you're capable of, you know what you're not capable of, and there's no shame in talking about it. And this was in the early days of mental health discussions, and it was very important to actually be honest with myself. And I was lucky enough to have supervisors who understood that whole process and really took it seriously. So I'm glad to be here to chat with you about some of these issues, and look forward to any questions that you may have.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you for sharing that story, Peter. I think that's really powerful. A lot of our work in digital forensics is with people who are at the front line of this fight. They are doing these investigations. It's an incredibly hard job. And I think that recognition, that understanding from people who've achieved very senior roles, that actually some people can do that, but it takes a special kind of person, and a lot of people just can't, is really important. It makes the people who can do that and are prepared to do that so much more, that's something that we really have to value and support, right?
Absolutely. You know, the level of consideration that leadership has to have for those who are on the front lines of this work is critical to the success of doing this work and for the mental health and longevity of those who are doing this work. At Homeland Security Investigations, there are psychologists, there are programs that help agents take a break from the challenges of doing that type of work. You know, it can be very, very draining. You know, all these young men and women have families of their own, and they sit behind a computer, often in a office that is got security controls. Not everyone can come in and see these images, and not to mention, you know, they work very closely with those prosecutors at every level, federal, state, and local, who are seeing more and more of this. And as we learned in Homeland Security Investigations, you know, Homeland Security Investigations was responsible for enforcing some 400 US criminal statutes. But there's a cyber component to every single one of them. And you never know what you're going to find during the course of that, whether it's, you know, child exploitation material, terrorist information, national security secrets being shared with those who should not receive them. But it's really a world that is critical to law enforcement these days.
So you took that experience of working on child exploitation cases, albeit briefly, with you on your journey as you became a leader and took on more responsibilities. How do you think that influenced you as a leader and affected the decisions you made operationally?
It had a major impact on me as a leader because I had that experience as a young detective in a very robust environment with a high volume of crime, a high crime area. And I was fortunate enough to have leadership that understood that were very sensitive, extremely considerate of the men and women who were doing that type of work. And that was in all disciplines, whether it was in the narcotics work that I did, or when I was assigned to the child abuse group and the sexual assault and rape analysis and helping them out. You know, it's really a tribute to the men and women who came before me, who made it very clear that this is something that can really have a detrimental effect on our people, and we've got to make sure that they're taken care of. So that was a lesson I learned at a very early age, and never forgot it. Never forgot it. Anything that you do in law enforcement that is highly sensitive, outside the scope of the norm, can really have a detrimental effect on those who are working those types of matters. And I just never forgot that. And when I was in leadership positions, I was always extremely considerate, as my bosses were with me, and always had a sensitive spot for those who did the work and trying to make sure that their welfare was intact as they worked these voluminous cases. Back when I started, a lot of the child exploitation material was through the mail, you know, and they referred to it as child pornography. And it was through the mail, and it has certainly evolved to the point where it's on a zip drive, or you know, it's the computer age has really taken off to the point where it's very, very difficult work. But that's basically what I found was very important to keeping in my toolbox of consideration for the men and women that worked at Homeland Security investigations.
So you've touched there on the change that took place during your career of material moving from pictures sent through the post to the electronic world. How do you see law enforcement in HSY and more broadly having to evolve to cope with that?
Law enforcement is going to have to work closer together, which they already are through the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces that are pervasive throughout the United States. And that's a mixture of federal, state, and local officers who are doing this type of work, sharing information, leveraging each other's intelligence information. But I think the first step is sharing of information in those environments, and also keeping up with the technology and leveraging technology that can help meet the requirements of their investigative work. And it's not always a government technology that, something that's created in the government, but it's those entities in the private sector who come up with extremely creative ways to combat these types of crimes.
And if I recall rightly, Peter, that's some of the work you're doing now, helping people in the private sectors who've produced technology that is relevant to law enforcement to find the right people in law enforcement, to find the right places to take that technology, to create opportunities for its adoption.
Exactly. At Control Strategies, that is one of the things that we love to do. Control Strategies has about 35 consultants from different areas of law enforcement, over many years of experience, and people who understand what is needed. So we're evaluating different technologies and determining if a company would benefit from us being a liaison for them and giving some exposure to various federal agencies on technology. So we pride ourselves on being able to vet what the people need. And, we work with companies that we think have a potential, and we have a passion for trying to get their technology in front of law enforcement, whether it's federal, state, or local. And we work with other companies to do just that, because I think those years of experience are invaluable in assessing what could be helpful. And to maintain the connectivity with, in my case, Homeland Security investigations and other law enforcement agencies that I worked very closely with over the years, it's very important to keep up to speed with the direction they're going and what might be useful, what technologies might be useful, based on what their mission set is. So it's really been a lot of fun doing this type of work.
It's one thing to know where the technologies are, um, but getting funding for technology in law enforcement very often seems to be a challenge.
You raise a great point there, Ian, because a lot of the agencies would love to have all these different widgets at their disposal. But that is where they have the challenges. Law enforcement is under significant scrutiny these days. And with that is scrutiny on the funding that is meted out to the law enforcement agency. So that's why that task force environment is so critical to the success of law enforcement internationally. It's not just these task forces within the United States, but it's these task forces and relationships that are built internationally that are critical. I mean, I don't care if you're a local police department or you're a federal police department. You should have some connectivity or some counterpart internationally these days. And that transnational aspect of law enforcement is really very important to recognize. But the funding aspect, I'll get back to that, is a challenge because there are competing priorities all over the place. In the federal system here in the States, you have to make sure that that is one of the priorities, and then you can pursue the adequate amount of funding. But again, like I said, they're competing priorities, and really anything could happen. But if it's a good enough product, then I think the government, federal, state, and local, they will find a way to obtain something that's going to help their officers and agents.
It's it's very interesting for me because obviously I'm not a former law enforcement agent. I sit on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean from the US, so I don't have I don't have the connectivity and connections directly. I mean, finding the right people is always a challenge. It sounds like you help people with that. Um, but this challenge of getting technology funded, it seems to me it's a slightly bigger thing because the way governments and law enforcement agencies work is they want to consume technology as a product. They want people like me, people like Psycho, people like the other companies you work with to go away and build technology so they can poke it and have a look at it and see if it works for them. And if it does, buy it. But for people like us, that means we've kind of got to build it before we find out if anybody wants to buy it. And I think the willingness to invest in new technology in the hope that a government one day buys it is, um, it's a limited thing. Do you think there's more scope for collaboration between government and innovators to try and be, sometimes I feel we have an almost adversarial relationship. We've built this thing. Do you want it? Yes or no? And government's like, well, we've got this money and we really don't want to spend it, but we might just have to. Is there something more cooperative we could be doing so that the right things were getting built in more efficient ways?
That's a great question. And that would be an interesting project to put together to have specific federal, state, and local agencies kind of come together in a one environment, and that could be a forum with any of these major conventions that take place in the law enforcement space to especially the international type organizations to get people in a room and have a little discussion about what is needed, what technologies would enhance their ability to do their job better and protect their populations better. So that's a very good question, and it's a challenge because you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. You're coming up with a device or a widget, and then you have, like, just like you said, you have to go to the agency and say, hey, do you want this? This is what it can do. Is this something that would work for you? Instead of investing in something that you already have created that you have an idea would be palatable to those organizations.
I think a lot of our best innovative work has come out of working with people in law enforcement who are prepared to engage really early, to have
Right.
an open conversation about possibilities, to share some of their challenges and concerns, and then to help direct us to do the right things. But it seems to me sometimes that's happening in spite of organizational structures and job descriptions, because
Oh,
very
I
often there
would.
are formal procurement processes and all sorts of restrictions. So it's happening in spite of organizational structures and rather than because of them. So I agree that there are forums where we could do these things, but I wonder if there are opportunities for us to become culturally more connected, as well as just creating some specific forums to do that.
Yeah, that is a challenge that should be looked at. If there are any companies that are kind of like yours who have this technology, it would be great to have broker that discussion and then come up with a strategic response to the needs of law enforcement.
So we were talking about technology. We went down the path of talking about funding a little bit, but technology is moving so fast at the moment. It seems barely a day goes by without news stories about a new machine learning model at the moment, or a new social media tools that people are using, and so on. How do people in law enforcement possibly manage to do the day job and keep up with all this change that's going on around us?
I think it's just by chance, Ian. I think I think the law enforcement officers have a mission set that they're going to have to accomplish. And what they do is they do their job and they do their job admirably. And they do their job with whatever tools that are at their disposal. And truly, if they're getting new technology, it's because they have sought it out or the companies have sought them out. So I don't know how to go about fostering change in that space other than fostering that communication, leveraging various organizations, the platforms of various organizations to do just that.
So, I mean, you must have had to keep up with a lot of technology change within your career. How did you go about doing that?
Oh, I relied on the subject matter experts. Peter Edge sitting in a deputy director role or a director role did not have the time to do the requisite research, but there were people who were available who were working on those types of matters, and they were able to find the technology. And a lot of folks who are very passionate about this kind of work specifically, they know what's out there. They all communicate with each other. And that's where you're going to find out exactly what would be fruitful to the process of their investigative work. So I think that was how I went about it. I would ask the technological agents, the tech agents that we had at HSI, what do you need? What type of technology is out there that would make your jobs better? And we had a central place that worked with the rest of the nation, but it wasn't mutually exclusive to doing that work for the rest of the nation because the field offices had the ability to find technology as well that would suit them in their respective areas of responsibility.
Certainly, we see a lot of agencies communicating with each other and learning from each other, and occasionally being out on a job and being jealous of the tools that another agency has brought with them as a way that new technology can percolate through different parts of the system.
Exactly, exactly. That's, there's that inherent goodwill between departments, and there's a little bit of competition. Oh wow, you've got a nice bright shiny object that you're using. How did you get that? What does it do? So I think there's a lot of that, and that's what keeps the public safe. The level, the passion and the level of commitment to the mission of all these different law enforcement agencies at all these different levels.
We've talked about the child exploitation piece and your experience there. We obviously work in that space. We also have done some work with work in the counter-terror space. One of the things we've sort of seen from the outside is that in child protection, there are quite a lot of events that bring officers from lots and agents from lots of different agencies together. And once people recognize that you are working in that space to help them, it's relatively easy to get into. In the counter-terror space, I guess by some level of necessity, there's a lot less of a network, or at least we've managed to find a lot less of a network so far. Do you think there are some spaces where there's more collaboration between agencies and more openness and less in others? And how does that affect innovation?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, the national security space is a smaller community because it's primarily those in the Joint Terrorism Task Forces around the country. That's the major task force that does this work, led by the FBI. And then there are uh, intelligence agencies that are engaged in this whole process as well. And I think the challenge for those in the private sector trying to share information and share information about the technology that they have is that it requires clearances. And the community is smaller because it's a little bit more secret. And as a result of that, you have to make sure that you have the capability to be a part of those discussions. And if you don't, you will never be able to get into the door, especially because most of this information is classified. So that is, I think, the biggest challenge. I think if there's a company out there that's able to get the requisite clearances to be able to make the appropriate connectivity with the various intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies that are working in this space, they will find some success, especially if their product is well received. But to get in the door and be able to even approach, you have to have that other ticket punch, so to speak, of having a classified security clearance.
Yeah, it makes that co-working on innovation just a little bit more complicated and difficult.
Exactly. Exactly. Like you said earlier, the process and procedures to just be recognized as a viable vendor, at least here in the United States, requires some preparation and planning and an understanding of exactly how to do it. We work with several companies who do that type of work. They can prepare a company to, let's say, be a part of the GSA schedule and be recognized as a vendor, and that would result in them being recognized as a legitimate government vendor for not only federal, but state and local law enforcement as well. So that is, again, another step that a company would have to have visibility into to take advantage of. And you're doing all this, like you said, you're doing all this before you even sell the device or engage in a contract. So it definitely takes a lot of investment, a lot of preparation and planning, and also knowing the right folks who have connectivity to those who have the tools to set up a company for that type of discussion and exposure to the law enforcement community.
It has a real impact on the shape of the innovation ecosystem, doesn't it? Um, the the crime of child sexual exploitation, we've talked about how the technology has changed. The scale of it enabled by technology is changing enormously as well. You've had a few years outside of law enforcement now, and I'm sure you've been able to reflect a lot on your time in the job. Would you have any advice for the sort of younger Peter Edge who is just moving into child protection work at Essex County Prosecutor's Office? What would you say to your younger self or the people who are doing that right now, that based on your experience and the perspective you now have?
Would say first and foremost, execute the mission, do whatever you're asked to do to execute any piece or part of the law enforcement mission. And it's a great understand that it's a great learning experience, but also be honest with yourself whether or not that type of work is for you. Because not all type of law enforcement work is uh, palatable to all investigators, detectives, special agents who are doing the actual work. So I would say those are the most important things that I would tell a younger Peter Edge. It would have been nice to have known some of those things before going into some of this work, but that's certainly not the case. You learn from your life's experiences, and I was open to doing any type of work, but I certainly learned that that work is a special type of work, and it just wasn't for me. I just could not stomach it, for lack of a better term.
I think know what you can deal with is a really great piece of advice, Peter. And in your case, you chose to move on quite quickly. But I think even for people working in that space, the fatigue that can build up, the harm that can build up over a period of time is significant. And the mission's so important, people don't want to give up on it. But actually, they have to look after themselves as well, right?
Absolutely. The mental health piece is critical to the success of the mission. You have men and women who are doing a great job in this space, but they need a break. They need a break. They need to spend time with their family. They need to see a more positive side of life, and then they can get back to it. One of the good things about doing that type of work today is that there's so many people and so many avenues to go down to have those discussions. And where you really can't, maybe a child exploitation agent can't feel comfortable talking about their experiences or sharing images or any of that stuff with a narcotics agent or a national security agent. But you do have a wide variety and many more people to bounce things off of who are doing the same type of work. And that's, through the ICACs, the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces, that's through the federal connectivity. And that is a beautiful thing, that when you have others that you can turn to, and there's a lot of socialization about the work, and people are brought together in different forums, conferences, conventions to meet with each other. So there's a lot of platforms where you can have that discussion. And the mental health piece these days, of course, is a lot easier to take advantage of than it was 40 years ago.
There's,
So,
there's
it's taken very seriously in law enforcement these days.
clearly an amazing community out there providing peer support to each other as well as executing on the mission.
Absolutely.
Peter,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure there's lots of things there that will be interesting to our listening. Thank you very much.
Ian, thank you for your time, and it's always a pleasure to chat with you. And I certainly hope your listeners benefit from some of the things that we've chatted about today.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ian.